I got two questions for you guys in here and two questions for everybody at home. And can I see the clock? I can see the clock. So I'm going to give you guys a minute to work out your answers. I'll give you another about 30 seconds to work out your answers to those questions. Give about 15 more seconds, guys. You're almost there. Get your answers. You guys at home too, get your answers. Cool, let's go ahead and start. So, what did you decide? Way to actually throw something out there, weirdos. No, what did you decide about me? Do you like me? It's a weird question to ask, right? It's kind of a strange thing, but here's the reality. As Christy was reading that, as I was walking up on the stage, as I stood here saying nothing, all of you were already deciding whether or not you liked me. It's a weird concept. It's a strange thing to think about. It's called unconscious bias. I'm not even going to pretend I understand how it works because I don't. But the reality is there's something, whether it was the way I'm dressed, my hair, my gray beard, the fact I got one of my kids on my socks, whatever it was, you were already deciding whether or not you wanted to listen to the guy on the stage. And that's cool. I'm not worried about the unconscious bias stuff. It's just part of human nature. It's just something that we do. And you guys are smart, so you know not to take, just that initial viewing and decide, you're going to give more context, right? We're going to go with this one? Yeah. Dang, man. If I start looking like I'm rap battling everybody, dude, you better shut it off. That's why I hate these mics. That's okay. So you already kind of started making that decision, and it's cool, man, because you guys understand you need context, right? You understand you don't make a snap judgment based on whether somebody's black or white, or they're a man or they're a woman, or they think, Joe Biden is competent, or they have eyes, right, and ears. Right? You don't make those, sorry if anybody's a Biden fan, I threw it out there. But, so you get that, but you still make judgment calls when it comes to the topic of generations. Everybody does. Everybody does. There's a lot of things I guarantee this entire room thinks they understand about generations. It's not true. Makes for good stories. Makes for good headlines. It allows the older people in here to go, oh my God, these young kids are ruining the world. It allows you guys to go, oh my gosh, these older people, dude, living in the past. But a lot of times it's just not true. So what we want to do in the very short time we have is let's talk about what is true. What does research say actually is true? And more importantly, how is that impacting you guys as you go into the workforce? Second question I have is this. Was anybody uncomfortable when I just stood here and said nothing? A little weird. A couple of you might have been. And the reason you were uncomfortable is because I was doing something that you just don't normally see. I was doing something that, I'm supposed to be the speaker, and the last thing, I wasn't speaking. So it makes it a little weird. So what we're going to talk about is really two things. We're going to talk about generations, and we're going to talk about kind of how things that, aren't how we normally see it can kind of get you uncomfortable, and how those kind of things kind of play together. So we're going to go fast, and we're going to talk, this greatest generation term. Christy mentioned, I've gotten to speak to about 400 companies over the past 6 or 7 years, and we always talk about generations. And one of the things that I've determined working with all those organizations and speaking and working with literally thousands and thousands of students around the world is that you guys right here, Gen Z, really can inherit that moniker of the greatest generation. I really think you guys will. You guys heard that term, right? The greatest generation, that World War II generation. I think that's going to be yours if. I think there's some big ifs, but I think you guys can really inherit that because the world is, let's be honest, you guys. The world is clamoring to be mediocre right now. It has never been easier for a young person to be great than it is right now, when people are clamoring and clawing for mediocrity. So we're going to talk about those ifs. So you're going to inherit that moniker, the greatest generation, if you can avoid, the entitlement that's being thrust upon you, if you can avoid kind of that cultural death grip that is being thrust upon you, if you can reconcile your own relationship with the truth. And that's where it starts to get uncomfortable, because that's constantly under attack too, even by people you love and trust and know. And if you can win back the war for your mind and kind of understand, how God wants you to press forward. So those are some big ifs. So I think what we're going to do is I'm going to give you 5 things to think about generations. And I'm going to go fast, so really, and I'll be here afterwards if anybody wants to talk, great. But I kind of recommend a lot of times taking notes, even if you want to take it on your phone, all good. If you want to get it out and just take notes on your phone, good. If we got older people in here that have a phone that don't allow them to take notes, if you guys could just flip yours closed, that'd be cool. Push the antenna in, Christy, it'll be all good, man. And we can rock and roll. So we're going to go through these 5 points. Point number 1, you may inherit that moniker, the greatest generation, and you really do have all the tools necessary to do so, but gaining that title is going to depend on you understanding what a generation even is. You think of it as, okay, well, people are kind of born here to here, you're in that generation, and that's part of it. There's an age thing, but as I've gotten to work with these organizations, what we find out is that we're really defining generations based on behaviors. We're taking a look, we're not saying you're just born here to here. No, we're taking a look at how a group of people roughly the same age will behave. How will they act in a various situation? How do they act in various parts of the world versus in other parts of the world? How do they act if they grew up in a religious home or a non-religious home, a military home or a non-military home, urban, rural? All of these things impact people's behaviors. And so what you have to understand about generations is it's really more about the behaviors of the human than it is just the age itself. So I told you, these past 6 years, I've gotten to work with so many organizations. And what I do is I team up with a team of PhDs that are located in Texas, and that's all they do is they study these generational trends. They study these behaviors, and then we get to go in and just talk about, how is that impacting the workplace, right? So we're looking at all these behaviors, and it's the behaviors that we have to really pay attention to. It's not just the age. That's the reason your grandpa's not flossing on TikTok. It's not just his age, although that'd be rad if he was. It's not just that. It's not just the age, why you guys aren't asking anybody for their fax number, or why you're not going to the store and being like, oh, hold on, I think I have exact change, right? Like there's a reason, and it's not just the age. It's a human behavior thing. Behaviors define the generations. So what are Gen Z behaviors? Well, believe it or not, you actually look a lot like baby boomers on paper. Kind of interesting, right? But it's kind of cool. It's actually an advantage for you guys. You look a lot like boomers. You're fiscally conservative overall as a generation. You are actually thinking about retirement. Percentage-wise, there's the same percentage of you saving for retirement as millennials, believe it or not. So you're very fiscally conservative, you're more pragmatic, you're tied to social justice, you're conscious and about not getting into too much of debt. It's pretty amazing. There's a lot of benefits to being Gen Z. You guys are really doing a lot of things right. But one of the interesting things too is you guys are tech dependent. A lot of people will look at you and say you're tech savvy. And you are to some extent, but as a generation you are very much tech dependent. Think about that, you guys. You've never known a world without the internet. For the most part, for most of you, right? And it's changed the way you view things. It's changed the way you view the world. It's changed the way you view employers, employment, the jobs you want to keep, the things you want to do. It changes all those things. You guys have never actually even had to leave your house to survive, right? I want food, ordered. I want clothes, delivered. Need a boyfriend, swipe right. Right? It's never been easier. It's never been more convenient to be a human being than it has been for you. And that's going to be the struggle. That's the struggle, right? For you guys is that convenience. And it actually makes you harder to employ because your expectations aren't necessarily mapping with a lot of the employers that you'll come up against. So you've grown up in this most convenient time and place to be a human, and we should take a look at what God says about behaviors too, especially when it comes to convenience. So here's something he says. When the people saw that Moses was taking so long and coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron, And they said, come, make us gods who will go before us. This guy Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. Aaron answered him, go ahead and take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, your daughters are wearing. Go ahead and bring those to me. So all the people took off their earrings, and they brought them to Aaron. And he took what they handed him, and he made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. So God's testimony is that we move actually towards comfortable behaviors. That's what we as a species have always done. He literally saves his people from slavery, brings them out. He's right there with them. They're hearing his voice, and they're like, man, that's a little too much. Could you tone it down a little bit? And he's like, cool, man. You got it. So they build this golden calf, and they did so because it was convenient, right? Everybody else was doing it. We moved towards comfort. They didn't question it. They just went along. So a generation is defined by their behaviors, and God says the behaviors of the masses are almost always driven by the masses more so than they are driven by him. The masses don't actually want to hear his voice. So when it comes to work, and you guys going into work, understanding that generations are going to have a hard time really escaping those ingrained behaviors will allow you to not be so frustrated with other people who are really having a hard time escaping those behaviors. And you can see here that it's the story of the world. When it comes to God, people refuse to change their behaviors too. It's just how we've always been. So it at least gives you that understanding. So second point, gaining that moniker of greatest generation is going to depend on your willingness to engage with those other generations. You're not going to have a choice. Like Christy said, we got five generations in the workplace, in the marketplace. That's actually never happened before. It's never supposed to happen, and it's causing a whole bunch of that because people don't want to talk about that. So just so you guys start to get how strong these gravitational pulls really are, I want to give you just a super brief insight into the generations you're going to be dealing with. So traditionalists, kind of that silent generation, born before 1946. A couple quick things about them. Very strong ties to the military. They grew up around the Depression, too, a lot of them. So they're the generation most comfortable with delayed gratification. I see that a lot when they're driving, right? And then you got your boomers, born 1946 to 64. They were taught to measure work ethic in hours per week, and those hours do not count unless they see you there working. So they believe there's no shortcuts to success, right? You just put your head down and you get to work for 30 years in the same organization. They have the hardest time accepting cultural changes. They still want you to use fax cover sheets. They think every organization needs a very, very strict hierarchy. You should never change jobs, right? Working from home doesn't really work. So they have some of these kind of preconceived notions, but they are starting to shift, especially in their communication. They're starting to actually they're okay with texting and things like that. So we're starting to see some shifts there with that generation, which is interesting. Gen X, like Christy, so 65, born, not that I don't know your age, but other Gen Xers, not her, were born between 65 and 76, right? And so they're naturally a very skeptical generation. They're kind of the trust but verify, the actions speak louder than words. And what's interesting is they're in between these two huge generations, right? There's about 40 million Gen Xers, and they're in between 80 million boomers and 80 million millennials, and they hate both of them, right? And so to make us mad, what they'll do is they'll go ahead and text, which still kind of makes boomers a little weird and a little upset, but they'll text millennials, but they'll punctuate their texts. So that's how you know it's Gen X too. So they do that just to make everybody mad because they don't like any of them. So, but what they are is very data-driven, right? They want a detailed plan. It actually makes them very, very good leaders. And so they're in a lot of spots of leadership right now, and a lot of them are taking care of their own kids and maybe even their parents. So they're trying to figure out like their next move. And so it's an interesting time to be a Gen Xer. Then you got your millennials born, maybe 77 to 95-ish. And I know that sounds weird to think that, okay, this dude up here, he's gray, he's, I'm 41 and to be considered a millennial. But again, you're looking at those behaviors, right? Millennial is just kind of taken on this connotation in our society. It just means like, well, you're younger than me and I hate you, right? So we just automatically use the M word. But looking at those behaviors, right? 77 to 95, usually have $100,000 in college debt and they're working as a barista. But what you need to understand is the generation is actually split in half. You've got 40 million millennials who are crushing it. 25% of all new millionaires every year are millennials. They have the majority of leadership positions in the jobs that you are going to be going into. They're the number one spenders in this country. They don't have the most money, but they are the number one spenders. They're the most influential generation in the workplace and marketplace, period, end of story, as you go into it. So you're going to be working with them forever. You need to understand how they think as well. So those are the generations you're going to be working with. So in business, you're going to need to understand where they're coming from. You're going to need to understand how to work through their perspectives, how to compare those to your own perspectives so that you guys can have that open dialogue. Otherwise, you're going to have some frustrations. And God has some things about engaging with others too. And so, Yah said to Noah, and that's a weird thing too, right? Saying Yahweh said to Noah. I saw somebody had a Yahweh shirt on and stuff, and that's weird because we don't hear that much. You guys know in Scripture, and this is the uncomfortable part, you guys know in Scripture, I'm translating from Dead Sea Scrolls, that name is actually in there 7,000 times. 7,000, I see your shirt right there, yeah. 7,000, not 6,999, not 7,001, 7,000 times in the original manuscripts. Very, very interesting. Also interesting that it got taken out somewhere along the way. So those are interesting questions to ask, man, and just dive in and go, okay, that's uncomfortable. That's a little weird. Like what? But just ask the question. But he says to Noah, go into the ark. You and your whole family. I found you righteous in this generation. Essentially, he told Noah to build the boat, bring anybody else that's righteous there, and then kind of let the rest just kind of drown in their insecurity and conformity. Yikes, dude. It's a little rough. It's a little rough. But he's like, man, people are going to go back to what's comfortable. They're going to go back to what they already know. Let them go. Let them do it. Most people aren't concerned about building the boat. God's been very clear. Most people will never be concerned about building the boat. So he's saying, look, man, ask questions. Go build the boat. Invite everybody else to come, but then let them do what they're going to do at that point. And I know that's an uncomfortable thing to even talk about, right? Because we always like, God clearly loves everybody, wants everybody to get on the boat. And he's pretty clear, man. He's like, just build your boat, see what happens. And I asked, especially going through translation, I asked a lot of the church leaders, what's going on? I'm like, dude, this is what I see. Why? And most of the answers were, I don't know. Or, we're not allowed to talk about that. Go ask the questions. So, understanding where others are coming from, getting rid of the assumptions that you have it figured out, that I have it figured out, that a teacher, a pastor, your parents, the owner of the business, that we all have it figured out. Get out of that mindset. Start having the open conversations, and you're going to be better off for it. Third point, and I'm going to just fire through these, man. Gaining that title is going to depend on you understanding the world as it actually is. I build the best K through 12 schools in the world. Period, end of story. There's 271 of us in this global network. Am I biased? Of course I'm biased. Am I wrong? I'm not wrong. It's possible to be both. They're the best. They're the best schools in the world. And part of the reason we're the best is because we build the school for the world as it actually is. And that means we're able to adapt. As things change, as things shift, we're able to adapt. I don't know if you guys heard, but last year was weird. Didn't faze us. Didn't faze us. We're ready to adapt. When I say it didn't faze us, I mean the 5-year-olds, the 7-year-olds, the 12-year-olds, the 18-year-olds we have on our campus. It didn't faze us because we're always prepared to adapt to the way things actually are. We don't get bogged down. We're able to continue to move forward, right? And so preparing for the world as it is and having that adaptability is a non-negotiable as you enter the workforce, right? It's the opposite of saying, okay, we're just going to lean on God, and then we're just going to sit home like it's the secret or something, and we just lean on him, and we just do nothing, and just there's an aspect of we need to go out there and be proactive as well, and then invite him to come along so that we can adapt, learn, unlearn, not get bogged down by tradition, right? So as you guys enter the workforce, outworking your peers, providing value, never ever goes out of style. You being the one to lead in adaptation in your generation is the best one at it. That is a huge plus for you guys. Going into the workforce and deciding to lead and adapt and outwork your peers is going to be a huge plus for you guys. Play the long game. You guys come out and start working at 22. Don't ask for a promotion at 23. Just wait. Play the long game. You got a long ways to go. Play the long game and go forward. Don't compare yourself to other people. Work hard, be nice, you guys. That transcends all generations. So what does God say about the real world? He says, well, don't let the wise man boast in his wisdom. Let not the mighty man boast in his might. Let not the rich man boast in his riches. But let him who boasts boast in this, that he understands and he knows me. That I am the God who practices steadfast love, justice, and righteousness in the earth. See, David knew him. David's not somebody we like to talk about a lot in church because David wasn't a good dude. He was a bad dude. He really was. I mean, you guys know the stories, man. He wasn't a good guy. But God still calls him. God called him my beloved son. And it's not because David was a good guy. David was not a good guy, but David was right. Let he who boasts boast in this, that he understands and knows me. David was right. He was never wrong when it came to God. He was wrong in the way he acted, not when it came to knowing who God was. And that's why he was the beloved son. See, God doesn't necessarily care about a lot of the things that the world tells you guys to care about. I mean, he cares about you if he knows you, and oh God, this is uncomfortable too. He's very clear that he doesn't know everybody. I know that's he's very clear that he doesn't know everybody. Yikes, that's uncomfortable. But he doesn't care about, God help me on the midterm. He's not worried about your midterm. The guys that go score the touchdown, right? And dude, he wasn't like, I got to get this guy scoring a touchdown right now. That's not the way it works. He doesn't care that you gain new followers on your IG or YouTube gets 10,000 views. Like, dude, he doesn't care. He cares that you understand and know him. Period. Says so. Fourth thing, we got 3 minutes. I'm going to fire these out. Fourth thing, gaining that title will only happen when the collective is driven by the growth of the individual. You know, Jordan Peterson, if you guys are familiar with him, is a big fan of our schools and what we do. He actually works with our MBA program, and he says, look, don't go out and try to save the world. Get your own house in order, and if everybody else will do that, the world gets saved by default because everybody gets their own stuff in order, right? And we don't want to get in the habit where we're sitting down and pointing out where everybody else is wrong rather than stepping up our own game. That's the definition of entitlement. And entitlement, so I go around and we're talking about generations and we talk about millennials, right? Everybody thinks they hate millennials, whether they know what a millennial is or not. And I say, okay, give me a word to describe millennials. What is the first word that comes out 99 out of 100 times? Is entitled. Now, do we in here all know some entitled young people? Do we? We do. Do we know some entitled older people too? Yeah, man. Like, I love how it's always just the millennials, right? Pretty sure it's not the millennials standing in line waiting to talk to the manager because their coupon expired 2 weeks ago, Susan. Entitlement is cross-generational. All right, if I had $1 for every time somebody over 50 said that all young kids are entitled, we'd probably have enough to buy a house in the economy they ruined. But entitlement is something that God addresses as well, right? So understanding that you, especially as a young person, you're entitled to nothing. As you go into the workforce, understanding that you're entitled to nothing, and it's a cross-generational behavior, so you're going to come across entitled people. God says the soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. You're entitled to nothing. Get out there and go work for it. Again, go outwork everybody else. If you do that with a mindset that you guys have and the skill set that you guys have, you will become the greatest generation. That is literally the only thing this generation is missing, is that work ethic. That's it. If you bring it, you are going to win, guaranteed. Last point, gaining that title only happens if you understand what God says about generations altogether. And here's the Cliff Notes version. He doesn't care. He doesn't care that things change, that trends change, that there's new technology, cheap mobile technology. He doesn't care. He doesn't care because he doesn't change. Your understanding of that is going to serve you far better than anything else you will ever do in your career. Understanding that he does not change is going to serve you best. God says to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. Thus how I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Becoming the greatest generation will depend upon you guys giving up the concept of being different and ultimately understanding that God's going to be the same and will forever be the same. Right? And this is usually the part where the guy on the stage kind of closes his eyes and I try to be powerfully elegant and saying, you know what, I'm going to go back to that guy that I mentioned that was, I've never been, I don't know if you guys have seen anything, but I've never had anything where God says, hey, Matt Beaudreau, that is my beloved son. But he said it about David, so I'm just going to finish with the words of David. And this is how we're going to close today, is with the words of the greatest lyricist that ever existed. He says, I am going to extol you, my God, my King. I am going to raise your name forever and ever. Every day I will honor you. I will praise your name and adhere to your prescriptions for living. Great is our God, greatly to be revered. His greatness is unsearchable. One generation will commend your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts on the glorious splendor of your majesty. On your wondrous works and prescriptions for living, I will meditate. And those works shall speak of the might of your awesome deeds, and I will declare your greatness. They'll pour forth the fame of your abundant goodness and shall sing aloud of your righteousness. Yahweh's graciousness and merciful. He's slow to anger. He's abounding in steadfast love. He's good, fair to all, and his mercy is over all he has made who abide by his instructions. All your works shall give thanks to you and your family who honors your invitations. They will speak of your glory throughout all generations. Go build your boats. I'm going to hang out here. If any of you have any desire to understand more about just generational context in general, how that impacts the workforce, you want to talk about the career you're going into, what employers are looking for, whatever that looks like. You just want my email to send me hate mail. I don't care what it is. If you want to connect and talk more about generations, I'm going to be here hanging out. I would love to have you guys come chat, but that is what I'm going to leave you with today, are the words of David. And go build those boats.